not going to let you, okay? I'm just going to run as fast as I possibly can through this material and keep you awake. I will take questions at just about any point, and going to share with you what I think we need to know. So let me make sure this is right. So a little bit of a vanity slide there. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, just to let you know. I am considered an expert. I always think that's kind of funny. I treat myself not very seriously, but my job very seriously. And I've written a lot and taught a lot and put thousands and thousands of people through training classes, multiple continents and things, been pretty much all over the world in terms of talking to people about mold, if you can believe it or not. The funny thing is, if you do a textbook like this, 360 pages on fungal contamination, people expect you to know something about it. And then that just leads you, kind of like marine surveyors. You got a little certificate there, and then they expect you to know something about boats. So, but I am very active in the industry, and we know lots of people, and that's the greatest thing. If I don't know an answer, I'll tell you right now in this presentation or anytime that anybody talks to me, I don't make stuff up. M-U-S. Have you ever heard that term? Made up and then fill in the last S on your own. I don't make stuff up. And so if I don't have an answer, I've got resources throughout the industry and all sorts of other industries that I call on. And in the old days, it'd be like I had a giant Rolodex, but now it's just all in my phone. So, all right, so what are we going to do in this presentation? Just literally 3 or 4 slides on each of these topics, kind of to help you out here. What is it? You probably are pretty familiar with that. This is really interesting, the health effects. Then we start gearing it down to what you guys do in terms of marine surveyors. And we're going to take it down through all these different steps here in terms of how you might want to do a investigation or document that in your marine surveyor reports. And then finally, just the last couple of things here, 2 or 3 slides on where your soft spots are going to be in terms of your liability on this. And how you're going to have to watch that. And I can even give you some language, you know, that you might want to, at the very end, have your pens ready to write down to go write in your report. I should have put them on a slide, and I just thought about this a moment ago because I was getting a little bit more familiar with this group and everything. And I should start by saying thank you to Michael and Randy for having me out here today, because this has just been fascinating for me to learn all about this. So what is this all about? The quick summary here is that mold has been around forever. Right? It's a naturally occurring organism. It's in all of our environments. You can't just run away to Asia and say it's not going to be there, or to Europe or anything like that. Most of the molds that we find on the vessels are going to be very similar to the molds that we find outdoors and the molds that we find in houses and commercial buildings and things like that. We'll show you why that's the case. And the fact of the matter is we're starting to catch up with information on the health effects that's only about 4,500 years old. If you go back to Leviticus 14 in the Bible, it talks to you about just how dangerous the mold is and why you have to get rid of it. So we've known it for a long time, and the question is, what are we doing about it? And for you guys, more importantly, where's that line between what you have to know and what you have to report, and kind of what you can let slide, or how are you going to approach all of that? And I know that this is potentially, for some of you, this is a brand new subject, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, great, this is something else that we have to put in our reports. Answer is, put your big boy pants on and big girl pants on, because that's what life is all about these days. And this is increasing liability. So again, you get in, you're looking at a boat, they just pulled the cover off, you know, after winter storage, and you get down, you see this in the cabin and things. You can't just say it's dirty. That's not an option anymore. Not with what you're going to find out in a minute here in terms of the organisms and what it does for you and everything like that. Before we go too much further, mold is a subset of the fungi kingdom. It's not a plant, it's not a bacteria, although a lot of stuff that grows on ships will be what they call a biofilm. This is going to get a little complicated. It'll be a biofilm, which is then going to be a combination of mold and yeast and bacteria and all sorts of stuff. So that an algae and everything, because you guys are out on the water vessel, so you're going to have a little bit more of the algal spores, which is a cross between like mold and bacteria that scientists can't even figure out what it really is. We just kind of throw it in its own little category. So you've got all these things that are growing. They're an environmental niche. And basically you have to figure out, is this going to be bad for you or not? So this particular slide here, I'm sorry, it's a little bit wonky, but it's talking about this new terminology that's out there. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, about sick yacht syndrome. Have you heard about sick building syndrome? Now they've got sick yacht syndrome. It's essentially the same thing. It's when you allow your, your air inside a vessel to become contaminated with whatever it is, and it makes people sick. It's pretty simple. Well, you have to be aware that that's out there now. So this is probably one of the more important slides here in terms of just understanding in these vessels, if you see something or smell something that smells like rot or smells like mold. Let me pause for just a second. Can I get a show of hands for people that are in here? How many people think they know what mold smells like? Anybody? What does it smell like? You know what? It's interesting. It smells like mold. No, I'm serious about that, because with all the different styles of mold and all the different volatile organic compounds, what we're smelling are literally chemicals that they're producing as they grow. We breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide for the most part. Mold takes in nitrogen and it breathes out, if it had lungs. It's not really respiration, but as part of its growth cycle, it exudes or breathes out what we call these volatile organic compounds. But the combination of the compounds is fairly unique. There's a lot of different ones, but when they come together, they smell like mildew or mold. And I think that is, goes all the way back as a warning sign to animals, insects, people, whatever. That it's mold, bad, stay away. What does rotted meat smell like? What does rotted seafood smell like? There's signals to us that you shouldn't eat this. Now the vultures, they love it. They use that, rotted smell to bring them to the carcasses and stuff. But for people, and there's certain beetles and worms and stuff that will come to the mold because it's like, hey, dinner bell, ding, ding, ding. That's not us. It's a warning sign to us that this is bad. So that's going to be the first thing when we get into the survey stuff. If you smell something that smells like mold, you need to make sure that you're documenting that. And then the other thing is that, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but you'll become, two things will happen in that particular case. A lot of times you'll open up hatches and holes and stuff, and then it'll dissipate a little bit, and then you won't smell it. Or your olfactory senses will become fatigued, and so then you don't smell it. So you just have to make sure that when you first smell that going into a boat, if you're smelling it, it's because there's mold growing there somewhere. Even if you can't find it later on, you need to document that somewhere in your report, that it had a musty or moldy smell. So what happens is that we have these starter spores, and these are all natural. I mean, mold is out there in the world around us. It's basically nature's garbage person, right? It breaks down a lot of organic or vegetable matter. Bacteria pretty much breaks down protein or meats. Molds and fungi and stuff are breaking down your plants for the most part. So that's a good way just to remember that. But these spores float all around. All they need is to land somewhere where there's some nutrient and some water, and they're going to start to grow. They don't need light. They can grow where it starts. Here's a picture of all sorts of different types of molds and stuff that are out there. This is what we see in our laboratory when we look at them underneath the microscope and stuff. I love this word, by the way, because I never get to use it enough. Ubiquitous. Oh, isn't that cool? Just means that's all over all the time. No one else seemed to enjoy that word quite as much as I did. I don't know. I just thought that that was cool. I like to use it as often as I can. It's about the only time I can use it. But the reality is we're all fairly resistant to mold when it is, when the spores are dissipated and stuff. You may have heard a long time ago the solution to pollution is dilution. And that's the same way that it is with mold. We can be exposed to a few mold spores and not have any problem. But as the concentration goes and grows, that's what's going to happen. And of course, you guys know this, in a vessel, you have a lot of times you have these areas where it's going to be tight and it's going to be more concentrated, and then you're going to have these problems. And this is a misnomer. I tend to get fairly upset with this because I'm an expert witness in legal cases, and the TV people talk to me all the time on different things. And they all want to talk about the toxic molds. I have to remind them, you know, water's toxic, right? People drowned. It's just, you know, every mold, if you get the concentration high enough, will be bad for you. What they're talking about are certain molds we don't have to get the concentration quite that high. All right, carbon dioxide will kill you. It's, you know, it'll displace the air, you'll die of carbon dioxide poisoning. Carbon monoxide, however, will kill you faster because you don't need as much of it, concentration in the air. So just, you know, when we think about things in a regular way and just kind of understand this. Now, the question for you as marine surveyors, if I go down and I'm in a hold or a cabin somewhere and I see mold or I smell mold, what's the airborne concentration and what sort of mold is that? And the combination of those two things, that it's mold and some sort of concentration, is that dangerous for people? Answer, you don't know. So if you don't know, then the fallback position has to be what? Put it on the report and flare it out as something that they may have to, but you have to alert your client to it, right? So that's going to be the issue when we get in there, is that even with some of the sampling methods and stuff, we can help you get closer in terms of identifying and assessing issues and whether it's a big issue or small issue and stuff. But ultimately, from my perspective, my best advice as an expert in this industry is you guys as the surveyors, it's pretty much see and document, or identify and document and then push to the professionals, right? Unless you want to become a mold professional, I've got a 3-day course. I've got a 2-day supervisor course after that. I've got a 3-day course. I can put you through 8 or 10 days of training and make you a mold professional, but I'm not sure that anybody really wants to go there. I'm not sure I want to go there, but that's fine. All right, so this is the other thing too. You guys have 2 different dimensions to this. Most of the mold that we're talking about in this presentation is what we call surface molds, whereas you guys also have structural issues when you get into the wooden components of the boats and things, and or even fabric, you know, canvas and stuff. If it's got mold growing on it, it can be deteriorating the surface of the canvas, and therefore you've got 2 different issues. It's the mold, but it's also the damage that's being done to these different surfaces. All right. Moisture is a controllable element with this. It all needs moisture to grow. Here's a little chart here. Different types of mold can start at relatively lower, what they call moisture or water activity levels. And certain molds, like the one that you hear about sometimes on TV, the deadly black stachybotrys mold. Has anybody ever heard about that one? The deadly black. I always have to, you got to lower your register when you say that, because it's important to do it that way. Yeah, so that is going to take more water for more time to grow that, which is good, because then that means we don't see it quite as often. But when we do see it, then that's going to tell you that that's going to be potentially more of a problem on some of these vessels and stuff. And this is going to be fairly typical, you know, cabin hatches and windows and that sort of stuff is going to have condensation on it. The condensation is going to be the moisture source. The paint's going to be the food source, even the plastic, the fact that it's non-porous and it shouldn't be growing on there. But what happens? Dust settles on it, skin cells on it, all sorts of stuff on there. And so it's not necessarily growing on the plastic or on the paint. It is growing on the materials that are on those things. However, there are certain things that it does like. It loves wood. And if the wood is not sealed, you know, they haven't kept up the seal on it, and it's been exposed to weather, and it's all flaked off and everything, you're going to have some of the fungal growth on that. Fabrics are wonderful for it. And then these other porous materials, it's surprising to me on these, you know, I don't know that much about the marine industry. You guys have to tell me. But as I looked into it to prepare this report, how much, as we go up in size, like the super yachts that we were looking at, some of those pictures and stuff, how much those are like houses on the inside, how they're building them out of some of the same materials and stuff. And they've got wallpaper, and they've got, you know, sometimes different sorts of substrates, but a lot of times they're even putting gypsum board and stuff on there. Underneath there, and that's just mold food. And as a matter of fact, just about all gypsum board coming from any construction supply house is pre-inoculated mold food. It's all got spores in it. So you're just waiting. If there's water that gets behind that, you know, piece of wallpaper or something like that, you're cooked. That mold is going to start growing, and you're going to have problems on it. From a temperature perspective, it pretty much likes the same temperatures we do. Some will go anything from freezing. You can actually get some molds that will grow in temperatures as hot as like 140 degrees, but the majority of them are pretty much in our temperature range. So if the vessel is the temperature that we like, it's the temperature that the mold likes. So that's another problem. There's another piece of drywall that is in the hold of a cabin or a stateroom of a cabin of a larger vessel. So this is interesting. You guys probably run into this all the time. You know, that boat has sat unused up on dry dock maybe, or in the water, and maybe has just a tarp over it, or you pull off the winter cover and you go out to do your assessment of it, and it looks like this. Now, is that just the dirt and debris that is settled on there, or is that mold, or what exactly is that? And she's going, this lady back there is going, that's mold, right? And the answer is it's probably a combination of both. But unless you do some simple testing, you know, in a situation like that, the fallback position is going to be report it as potential, right? Because you can always say, I'm not a mold expert, I'm a marine surveyor, but this looks suspicious and you should have that checked out. So just like if you turn over an engine and it doesn't start, or go to turn over the engine and it doesn't start, like somebody was talking about previously, right? The thing didn't even start. Is it just because the battery, or is it, I don't know. I'm not an engine expert, right? But it's something you put in your report. You've got to move forward with it and let people know. So this is probably, the next 2 or 3 slides are probably the ones that are most important to you from the standpoint of why you need to do something. And just be aware of some of this. And that is because there are health effects that are associated with this. So all of these things, the fact that they're allergens, and now I don't know, have you heard this new term, asthmagens? The medical people are using this over the last few years because it's different. Certain things cause allergic reactions and certain things also cause asthma attacks. And so they call them asthmagens. VOCs are volatile organic compounds, but those are irritants. And then there's this weird term called mycotoxins. That basically means mold poison. The molds produce natural poisons to protect their environment from other environmental things. So the bacteria goes first on some of these surfaces. The mold wants to take over. It has to displace the bacteria, so it produces chemicals that kill the bacteria. Oh, guess what? Dr. Alexander Fleming in the 1800s figured that out in England and produced penicillin, right? From molds, penicillin molds. So we can harness some of it for good things, but those mycotoxins are essentially antibiotics in a lot of cases. This is probably pretty important too, is that no, not just the United States, but no government agency that I'm aware of has actually come up with a permissible exposure limit for mold. And that's because there's so many different types and there's so many different combinations, and primarily because there's a genetic factor that's related to this as well. It's not just the dose of the mold, it's the dose of the mold to who gets exposed to it. The best example I can think of to explain this is alcohol, right? There's some people who are sensitive to alcohol. A single drink can, you know, get them drunk. And I was going to say, I can't do this anymore because, you know, politically correct, it's not correct to say that. In college, we would call that a cheap date, but I did anyway, and so now I'm probably in trouble, right? Everybody's going, yeah, did he really say what he said? Can we edit that out, Michael? Can that come out? I'm in trouble. All right, I'm sorry. All right, but the point of the matter is there's some people, for whatever reason, their genetic makeup doesn't allow them to respond as well to higher exposures to mold as other people. On the other hand, that also means from a genetic standpoint, there can be people that just like, I don't care, I don't smell anything, or it doesn't bother me, I've been exposed to this stuff for years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're gonna have both ends of the spectrum. The problem for you folks is that you don't know what the health or the genetic makeup is of the people that are going to be on that boat. Unless you've got something on your survey form for your buyer that says, you know, would you tell me whether the doctors have said that looked at your DNA and said that you're mold sensitized? Now, 10 years from now, you might actually be able to have that on your form. They'll probably be screening for all of this, but right now there's really no way for you to know that. And so you don't know how dangerous even a small amount might be for somebody. And you just, again, you have to be aware of this and you have to point it out. This is really huge. I could spend, I actually spend a whole day on a course for sensitized individual where I teach people about this new recognized medical syndrome called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which is basically people getting sick from mold because their genetics don't allow them to deal with it properly. Yes, sir. Like what? Okay, so the question for those of you who maybe didn't hear it is that, is this chronic inflammatory response syndrome similar to other diseases like the bronchial diseases and things like that? And the answer is whether it be chronic fatigue syndrome, whether it be the bronchial syndrome, whether it be chronic inflammatory response syndrome, what the doctors are finding out, and I should point out, just like our speaker before said, I'm not a doctor. I just hang out with them and end up learning too much about this stuff. So don't press me too far on this, but basically what they're finding out is that the inflammation is your you know, immune system response, and whether that targets the specifics of the bronchial passages for asthma, or whether that goes after the whole body system like chronic fatigue or Lyme disease in response to a bacterial bite from a tick. There's all these different things that happen that send your immune system essentially into overload and it doesn't shut off. And mold exposure can do the same thing. And depending on what causes that system to go into overload without being shut off, it's going to have different names. And in this particular case, if it's a water damaged structure or vessel or mold, they're going to call it chronic inflammatory response syndrome. But this is the point of me sharing this with you, is to let you know 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was this belief out in the industry that mold doesn't really cause serious problems. It's just, you know, a few allergies or something like that. That is not the way that the world works anymore, okay? All right, so where do we find it on boats? Well, if it's in dry dock, like you see here, somebody's on their trailer and you're looking at it, you can find it on the, you know, exterior surfaces, certainly in all the holds and the hatches and all of that. Basically, it can be anywhere. So if you think about it, wherever the moisture went, the air probably is there with spores. It can be inside the HVAC system. You know, your larger yachts and stuff, they have ductwork and all sorts of stuff rolling around in there. And if it gets inside that ductwork, that becomes really interesting in terms of, now it can be cleaned in most cases, but that's going to be something that's going to be really more like specialized work afterwards. But these are the big ones right here. The shrink wrap boats in storage is great. It keeps the weather out of them and everything. But you go through that whole temperature change in terms of winter and summer and spring and all of that. And or they keep them wrapped up for a few years because they're trying to sell them or whatever it is. And then it's okay, well, it's time for you guys to do the survey, and they start pulling the covers off, and maybe they take a hose to it to get some of the you know, just the dust off of it. But when it starts looking like this, you gotta think about, is that really just dirt, or is there organics in there? All right. So for you guys, in terms of guys and gals, I'm sorry, for the surveyors who are trying to figure it out, what are you going to do with this? And I don't want to overcomplicate this, right? Can you see it? Write it down. Can you smell it? Even if it's just temporary. Like I said, you open up hatches and or you're there for a few minutes and then you realize, this isn't as bad as I thought. Well, two things, like I said, I mentioned this once before. Either you've diluted it or you've fatigued your nose. Either one still means that there's an issue there that probably needs to be addressed, and you have to put it down. You can certainly do, there's all sorts of things to do, air sampling, there's surface sampling. I thought long and hard about this, literally for months as an expert in the industry, learning about what you guys and gals do as surveyors and things, and what would be the best response for you. And I have come to the conclusion, and I think well thought out conclusion, that a good visual and olfactory review, and then if there's going to be sampling, probably surface sampling. Because do we need to sample this or this if we can see it on there? Do we need to sample and specifically tell somebody what that is? And the answer is no, quite honestly. If it looks like mold, smells like mold, treat it like mold, right? I don't necessarily need to know the specific species or whatever it is. Now, the question's going to be, if this is in the hold or the bilge or underneath there that we've seen different pictures of, how much of those spores, which are microscopic spores, have they gotten somewhere else? In other words, this is in the engine room that we find this, but it's a big yacht. What's next to the engine room? The kitchen in a lot of these ones, right? They're all tucked down on the back end of the vessel. So the question becomes, has the stuff from the engine room contaminated the kitchen, even though I don't see it growing anywhere in the kitchen because it's all stainless steel and tile and all the rest of that stuff? Answer is, you might want to sample in the kitchen. I don't necessarily need to sample in the engine room. I can see it in there. I know that that's got to be addressed. The question is, did it get away, so to speak? Is it out somewhere else in the vessel? So that would be my suspicion. There's a couple more sessions tomorrow, by the way, where people are going to talk. I've got a couple of people that are going to talk about how to inspect for it a little bit more in detail, so I don't have to go into that, and even how to treat it tomorrow. So again, your inspection as a marine surveyor, if you have a question about it and it's porous material, are you guys doing moisture measurements anyway for like rot and that sort of stuff? You've got moisture meters, non-penetrating moisture meters and stuff. Just realize that even if the moisture meter's in that kind of middle zone there, that could be an indication that there's going to be mold on the back side of that surface. And so you have to, be a little bit more aggressive in terms of looking at it and things. All right. Kind of washed out here on the slide here, but if the lights were a little darker in the room, you could see, and you guys have seen plenty of things like this, right? You get out there and a lot of the wooden structure on the boat is discolored, and just, now the question is, again, from a structural standpoint, if it's rotted, that's a whole different issue, because now we've got to take care of it from a structural standpoint. But as, if it's just surface mold that may be on there, you're probably going to smell that, at least initially. And if that's the case, again, document it. All right, if you get somebody to come out and remediate it, again, I love pictures like this, because these are the ones you're going to run into. Is that just dirt, or is that some combination of dirt and mold? That might be worth sampling. If you don't see active colonies somewhere else, that might be worth sampling, just to say that I sampled it and or there wasn't a lot of mold in it as compared to a lot of mold in it one way or another. At least you get information for your clients. And by the way, the other thing I would say, of course, for you guys, you can always add this as an add-on. Do you guys know the whole story in the cleaning and restoration industry about the carpet cleaners? You know anything about carpet cleaners? So they'll come out and they'll do your whole house for $40 a room or something like that. And the idea is to get out there and then, well, do you want the stain remover on the spots first? Do you want the protectorant on the carpet after it's been cleaned and that sort of stuff? It's essentially, it's add-ons, right? And this is kind of the way that I see your industry, at least right now in regards to mold, is that the smart surveyors may want to pick this up and start offering some of the testing as an add-on. Particularly if you see something that is suspicious. I don't know if you want to necessarily jump in whole hog and start you know, putting a certain number of samples in on every vessel survey or whatever. But think about having another tool in the toolbox, and an inexpensive tool in the toolbox. The little slides and stuff that you'll hear about tomorrow they're, believe me, they're not 2,800 pounds. Wait a minute, maybe we should for marine. I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe the price needs to go up. But no, you're talking a couple of bucks, right? And so you can do this rather inexpensively and put another tool in your toolbox, and you're you know, carrying around some microscope slides. It's going to be smaller than your wallet, right? So it's pretty simple to use, low cost, easy to get around. It's not something that you have to be afraid of. On the other hand, if the vessel is contaminated and we've got to start dealing with it, and it's got some serious mold growth on it, there are some priorities in the industry as to how we deal with that. And I don't read my slides to you, but I've got to read this to you. I mean, it is in an order. We need to protect the workers who are doing the job first. We need to make sure that that job that they're doing is not spreading more stuff around and actually cross-contaminating different parts of the vessel, and thereby negatively impacting the occupants. And then we were talking about this before with the donations and everything. What are you doing to that vessel that may impact its resale price? And there's the realtors, and I know that this is houses and vessels, and you got to make that comparison. But there's a subset in the realty market that are mold damaged houses. They essentially have a black mark on them, bang. So that's you know, $400,000 house, except that it's a mold contaminated house. Even after the mold has been fixed, all of a sudden it's a $300,000 house because it's got a stigma attached to it. And I think you're going to start seeing the same thing happen because, like I said, the mold can be dangerous, and it's kind of luck of the draw as to who comes on that vessel that might be hurt. It's all genetics, and we don't know that genetics until after they're hurt, which is really bad. So this is very similar. This is a mold project that was on a cruise line. You see this all the time for noroviruses, but now we're starting to see it for a mold cleanup as well. So when they do the remediation, typically in our industry, and this is floating over into the marine industry as well, there's just three ways that we classify it. Normal fungal ecology. You're never going to get a vessel free of mold, right? It's all around us, it's in the air, always going to be some there. So the question is it normal? The second is what we would call the secondary contamination of the spores. That engine room to the kitchen example that we were talking about previously. And then, of course, if there's visible colonies, if it looks like this, is that just pop that got spilled on the carpet of the you know, pontoon boat there, you think? In through here? Probably. But the sugars now have become the food source, and it's sat out in the open, and now the little bits of soda or alcohol or whatever was there has become the food source. Now the mold colonies are growing on it. Can the carpet be saved, by the way? Anybody? It's marine carpet. It's waterproof carpet. Just clean it, for goodness sakes. Ah, there's our mold expert in back, and he's going, no, take it out. Take it out. Replace it. Come on, Chuck. Give him a break here. All right. So here's your physical removal and cleaning. The guy that's coming up after me is going to talk to you about a really unique way to do some of this, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of that. But we have some kind of unique challenges on the vessels here. You always got to get a picture in like that on one of these, don't you? I mean, the vessels are out in the environment as compared to houses and buildings that are supposed to be dried down. They just are full of these little, you know, engine compartments and hatches and storage spaces. You never waste an inch on a vessel, right? We can always cram a life jacket in there, a wet one, for 3 months at the end of the season, and then close the hatch on it, and then be surprised in the spring when we open it up and it smells like, you know, serious mold and stuff. So there's all these really hard spaces. Obviously, they're in a wet environment, and that is not so helpful for the mold. And then just, you know, depending on the vessel, and depending on the size and what's in there and everything, we just have all these different materials, some of which are going to be mold resistant. A lot of the laminates and the polys and the plastics and stuff, the mold tends not to grow on it as much as it grows on the stuff that lands on it. But fabrics and wood and soft stuff and cushions and mattresses and things, that's going to be ugly. Of course, we talked about them being stored in different weather conditions and condensation. I want to talk just a little bit about the physical removal. When we talk about physical removal and its porous materials, we're talking about actual removal of the porous materials, not just trying to, you know, rub it off of there. Of course, on non-porous things, who knows? Is that oil residue? Is that dirt? Is that mold? I don't care. Just clean it. It's a boy. Just clean it up, make it look good. Something like this, a mattress in one of the staterooms or something like that, don't even try and clean that. Don't even tell your client that that should be clean. Just tell them it needs to go away. Because even if you could clean it from the top fabric here, what about the, you know, the ticking underneath and then the foam underneath that and blah, 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 blah. So some things are just, quite honestly, pretty impossible to clean. Examples, again, people do store a lot of clothes on some of these vessels for a longer period of time. So we've seen stuff like that. Those pretty much have to go away. However, on a lot of non-porous or semi-porous surfaces, there's different chemistry that will take it from kind of what you see here to what you see right here. It can be cleaned. It can be treated. Depending on how bad it is, they may not be able to do it themselves, may need to call in the pros, and you're going to, again, hear more about that from Dennis and Jim and everybody tomorrow, so be aware of that. But what we do say is that generally there's not a one-step system. You know, you'll hear about this, products say, oh, it cleans and sanitizes and cleans and prevents. And generally the cleaning you kind of want to do first, and then, you know, protective and stopping it. So it's like cleaning the carpet and putting the carpet protector on it, right? You don't want to put carpet protector on a dirty floor. You don't want to put mold preventive on a moldy surface. So, a couple of things here. I didn't think that was mine, but it might be on there. I don't know. People help me with these things.
Hello.
Right?
Hi, Jason. How are you doing?
I'm all right.
I was calling to see how many Dan Boder brochures you wanted me to send you.
I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm just going to keep
Dan
talking.
Boder, what?
I've only got a few slides to finish up, so I'm going to keep talking over the top of that. So
Just one, two. Make it two.
You want two?
so here's the.
Yes.
I don't know what you're doing to me. It's just at the big conclusion, and look at what he does to me. So anyway, this is a huge consideration. If you're starting a survey and you go on a vessel and it looks bad and smells bad, you need to think about backing out and putting personal protective equipment on. And that's going to include some sort of respiratory protection. It doesn't have to be necessarily a full face, you know, Darth Vader sort of mask or anything like that. There's good protective masks that look like the, you know, surgical masks. They're called filtering face pieces. If you want more information about that, talk to me afterwards. I'll give you my best advice on that. But understand the precautions that you may need to take. And if somebody says they're going to spray it with something, learn a little bit about what that chemistry is so that you can make sure that you know what you're talking about, as the sign says there. The best way to make it look like you know what you're talking about is to actually know what you're talking about, or just tell them, you know, call the guys at Wondermaker, call the guys at RGS or whatever. All right, whatever you did to me, Randy, that's not working anymore. Nor is it working here. All right, so the big reveal at the end, and Mike's like, you're killing me here, brother, you're killing me. Okay. All right, liability issues, last couple of slides here. So there's a couple of things that are going to get you in trouble, right? And the first one is with what we know now, not just because of this class, but in general in the industry. With what we know, If you see something, smell something, and don't write it down or don't put it in your report, that's going to be a huge flag. Somebody's going to get on that vessel, and they're going to be one of those sensitized individuals. We've had cases, honest to goodness, I was an expert witness in this case. They were doing work in this house upstairs in the master bedroom bathroom and taking the debris out that was moldy, taking it down the stairs and out the front door. And a very elegant house, had a vestibule and everything. The mom and daughter came back, they got them started in the morning, told the restoration company where the bathroom was, and then took the 14-year-old daughter to school, and she had some other after-school activity. They came home at like 4:30 in the afternoon. The young daughter was asthmatic. She walked in the front door 3 steps into the vestibule, and she had an asthmatic attack that was so bad that her EpiPen didn't really control it, and she had to go to the hospital. And that was because they had disturbed all the mold and taken it down the stairs and out the front door to get it out to the truck. But they had done it without any controls. And we just don't know who's going to be on there. So we open up the hatch. This is this nasty, filthy looking bilge and everything. But we have to spend a moment, use a flashlight, and look at this and say, well, yeah, that's oil and that's residue and that's dirt and whatnot. But if there's stuff that looks like it might be mold growing on there, take a picture of it, put it in your report, call it out, have them check it. Use one of your samples to check it if you're so inclined, but at least give them an indication of this. This is probably where you're going to get in the most trouble, not necessarily you folks because you don't do the repair work or anything, but if for some reason or somehow you implied in your report that it's just mold, just cover it up, it'll be fine or whatever. Don't go there, right? And more importantly, I don't care what the can or the bottle says. Oh yeah, we can kill it and we'll coat it and we'll do it all in one step. Well, okay, we'll just go from there. All right. Don't over or under-emphasize the issue. I actually coined these 2 terms that are now in the mold remediation industry. Mold minimizers and fungophobics, because either one is not going to do you right. You're objective about this. You saw in Randy's report writing session that you're not making the news, you're just reporting it. As a laboratory, we run into this problem all the time. People are like, well, oh, this is so horrible for the client. Don't you feel bad telling them this? No, right? I didn't make the conditions. I'm just reading the samples. I'm just giving them the information. Maintain your professional integrity. Stay at arm's length from your client. Be objective about it, and don't sugarcoat it, and don't go to the other end, which is, we've got to go run screaming from the vessel. No, generally we don't. If it's carbon monoxide, yeah, it's like, get them the heck out. If it's mold, yeah, it's bad, but let's deal with it, all right? And then get them to some of these credible sources. So let me just finish with this. And first of all, let me just finish by saying I am so impressed with what I've learned about the marine surveyors. I had no idea about this industry. And I talked to a lot of my boat owner friends and all that stuff. And I've got a brother-in-law who just bought a boat and had got his marine surveyor report. And it was wonderful. I mean, I really have come to appreciate what you folks do. But I also understand that you have a duty. And it's very clear to me, you need to understand the basics of this. You need to document that presence. You just cannot let it slide anymore. Just because you didn't know about it or didn't know what to say about it or anything like that, that's not going to cut it anymore. And last but not least, you guys can be the bridge. Not the bridge on the vessel, but the bridge between finding it, understanding that it can be a potential problem, and who can help take care of this problem. Just remember, again, like I said, you don't make the news, you just report it. You don't have to be responsible for fixing it. You just have to tell them where there's good people that can help them fix it. And that's what this conference in my mind is all about, is giving you enough information so that you can do a better job as marine surveyors, but understand that you absolutely have a duty now to appreciate some of this when you see it in these vessels and report it appropriately. So there you go, that's me. We take calls and emails from people all the time. All you have to do in your email or your call is just say, hey, I heard Michael at a presentation, or I was at the one in Baltimore, or some sort of keys, so that, because we do try and screen those, so don't make it sound like you're a salesman on the phone, or else you won't ever get through to me. But if you just explain that you have a question, you heard me at a conference or something like that, we treat those as priority calls, because it's all about spreading the knowledge in the industry. God bless you guys. I don't know if I have time for any questions, or if I used exactly all of my time up, or if I can steal 5 or 10 minutes from the next group there. Sure. Or I can just repeat them in, if that's easy.
Go on and do that.
Okay, go ahead. Right.
How do you know it's not mildew?
Okay, so the question is, and I'm repeating this for the video and stuff, black nasty stuff around the hatch of a older vessel. How do you know it's not mildew? And the answer to that is really an easy one, because mildew is a form of fungal contamination, which is similar to mold. And so I don't care if it's mildew or mold. It's not supposed to be there. You just write it up the same way. So that's another thing. You can use the term mold. A lot of people, fungi and mold are interchangeable. But if you don't think it's like a dangerous mold, or you think it's mildew or something like that, you can just say it's fungal contamination or suspect fungal contamination, or just call it suspect mold. Anything that's, and it could be algae, right? If it's green and it's growing on there, it's probably not mold, but it might be algae. Who cares? It's something growing in a location where it's not supposed to grow. You just need to call it out. Let the experts figure it out. If it's algae, maybe I can wipe it off. If it's mold, maybe I have to do something else. If it's mildew, but in some respects, that's not your job. It's just alert them to the issue. There's a potential issue here. Let them deal with it. All right, somebody else had a couple of questions. I talked everybody into submission. Oh wait, there's one more. Yes, a testing mechanism is a question. Is there a slide? It's essentially a plastic microscope slide. You're going to hear a bunch about this in Dennis's presentation tomorrow. It's a plastic microscope slide with a sticky end on it. And it's plastic, so it actually bends a little bit. So if it's in a really weird position and I got to get around an edge or something, it's not like the old glass microscope slides that all of you that are as old as I am broke when we were in high school and stuff. So there you go. Modern, fancy plastic slides. I'm so excited by this. Yes?
So where do you send those to get evaluated?
Where do you send those to get evaluated? So there's all sorts of labs all around the country and all over the world that can do it. We do it at Wonder Makers. We tend to specialize now. We've been working on this for months in terms of adapting it to the marine environment. So we're happy to have you send them here. But that would be through your distributors and however else that's going to work. So you'll hear a little bit more about that tomorrow, and you'll get the details on that, I'm sure. I'm not here as the salesperson. I'm here as the info person. I will point out, however, and I just want to make sure that you guys don't have a misinterpretation about that, is that Wonder Makers, the company that I represent, we do have a laboratory, and we do the analysis on slides like that and then send out reports. So we're happy to do that, and I want you to understand that. So there could be a financial tie, but I'm not the one who's selling them to your industry, if that works. All right, yes, sir. Yes. So the question is, all right, so here's the deal. The question, first of all, is there, if you're doing a survey, you've got a timeline, can you take these samples and get them back in a timely fashion to meet your timeline? And the answer is, we'll do them as fast as you want to pay for them. So there's a standard, hey, I'm just being blunt. There's a standard 7-day turn. And if you've got a 2-week, turnaround time on your report and you get them out really quickly, you can get the results back in plenty of time to do your report. If they're paying you to expedite the report, you want them in 24 hours, you want them the same day, they can be done that quick. Yes, sir. Right. Well, hang on. The question is, or the comment is, that most of the survey reports turn in 2 or 3 days, and so taking time for sample could be a problem. I understand that, but like I said, you can get 24-hour turn on the samples. You're just going to pay a higher price for it. The other thing I would point out is that, and we have to do this in our reports when we do inspections of houses and different buildings and stuff. Sometimes we need experts to look at it or whatever. We give them a preliminary report and then say we're waiting for lab results, or, I mean, there's different ways that you can handle it. But as long as you've identified it as a potential problem, perhaps you've taken the samples, you're waiting for a lab report, you can still get out a preliminary and then follow it up with your specifics later. How do I do a boat? I let marine surveyors do the boat because I have no idea how to do a boat. I don't do remediation, and I don't do inspections of vessels. I do inspections of hospitals and buildings and that sort of stuff. But I don't consider myself an expert in your industry, and so I let the... Okay, so the comment, well, I just want to make sure everybody's getting it on the tape. So the comment is, if you use the M word, mold, and you put it in your report, then doesn't that have a negative impact on the person being able to get insurance and or financing, or even doesn't that crab the whole sale? Right. So two things I want to respond to that real quick if I can. One is that yes, mold is a hot button word in your industry. Part of that is because your industry is new to this. It was a hot button word for the real estate industry 10 years ago, and they had to figure out how to deal with it. Number two is that even though that may be a hot button issue, again, it goes back to you're the reporter, you're the inspector. And so if you start deciding that I don't want to use that language because that's going to crab the sale, that's like a home inspector 10 years ago who wouldn't identify the mold because he thought it would crab the sale. And those are the guys and gals who get sued. I mean, you can phrase it any way you want. You can call it fungal colonies. You can call it suspect microbial growth. I mean, if you want euphemisms, you shoot me an email. I'll send you a list of things that you can use as the equivalent to mold, okay? What I'm saying, though, is that you have a duty, when you see this stuff, that suspect stuff, you as a surveyor have a duty to report that. And how you want to report it and what caveats you want to put in there and how you want to work with your people, I understand that those are all sensitive things. But you also have to understand this industry has to catch up with the rest of the other industries too. And just because 10 years ago, the real estate people were saying, don't say the M word. It's like, yeah, I've got 20 ways I can say the M word without using the M word, but you're still going to get the information because I have a duty as an inspector, you have a duty as a surveyor to get the information out there. All right, a couple more. Right, so the comment is that particular surveyor puts it in his report. He says that they identified what could be suspect mold, uses the word, but then he just puts you need to clean and sanitize. Or the terminology that I would use these days is that you need appropriate remediation, cleaning or remediation. All right, because if it's into a wooden surface, you may need to blast it, you may need to sand it, you may need to, do you guys do wood on the laser? You may need to laser it. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do to it. That's right, I saw the video. But it might be more than just cleaning. If it's beyond on the surface, you probably need to do something beyond just cleaning the surface. Sanitize. While killing is different, though, sanitizing and killing, I still don't want to leave it in place and kill it. All right, that's still going to be bad for you. All right, I think I'm getting the high sign to get out of here and everything like that. God bless you guys. Thank you so much for putting up with me. I appreciate it very much. I'll be here all afternoon.